The steady beeping of machines surrounded me like a metallic lullaby, but nothing could have prepared me for the words that would shatter my world into a million pieces. There I was, Martha Reynolds, 62 years old, lying in that sterile hospital bed in Salem General Hospital, fighting for my life after a massive heart attack that had struck me down like lightning on what should have been the happiest day of the year. It was supposed to be my granddaughter Emma's sweet 16 birthday party. I had spent 3 months planning every detail, every decoration, every moment of joy for my precious girl. Instead, I found myself connected to tubes and wires, my body weak, but my mind sharp enough to hear every whispered conversation around my supposedly unconscious form. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic. Dr. Harrison had explained to my family that while the heart attack was severe, with proper treatment and time, I had a fighting chance. My savings account, which I had built up to $127,000 over decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice, would easily cover any treatments not handled by insurance. I had always been prepared, always been the responsible one. But then came that moment that would haunt me forever. My daughter Rebecca, my own flesh and blood, the girl I had raised with endless love and sacrifice, leaned close to Dr. Harrison. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of that room, her words rang out like a death sentence. "Don't try so hard, doctor," she said, her tone cold and calculated. "She's lived long enough. Maybe it's time to let nature take its course." The machines around me continued their steady rhythm, but inside my heart was breaking in ways that had nothing to do with my medical condition. Each word felt like a dagger thrust deep into my chest. I clenched the hospital sheets so tightly that my knuckles went white, fighting every instinct to open my eyes and confront her right there. But something deeper, some survival instinct, told me to remain silent and listen. Dr. Harrison's response was professional but firm. "Mrs. Walker, I understand this is difficult, but your mother's condition is treatable. We have every reason to believe she can make a full recovery." "But the costs," Rebecca continued, and I could hear the greed creeping into her voice. "She's already spent so much on medical bills over the years. Her savings, her house. Wouldn't it be more merciful to just keep her comfortable?" The audacity of her words made my blood boil. This was the same daughter I had worked 3 jobs to put through college, spending $45,000 of my own money when scholarships fell short. The same daughter whose wedding I had funded with $23,000 from my retirement savings. The same daughter I had helped buy her first house by gifting her $30,000 for a down payment. Dr. Harrison excused himself, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, and I heard Rebecca's heels clicking across the linoleum floor as she made phone calls in the hallway. Through the crack in the door, I caught fragments of her conversations with her husband Mark. "The old bat has to have at least $100,000 left," she whispered into her phone. "Plus, the house in Salem Heights is worth at least $300,000 now. If we play this right, we won't have to worry about Emma's college fund or our mortgage anymore." Rage coursed through my veins like fire. This woman, who I had loved unconditionally for 38 years, was literally calculating my worth while I lay fighting for my life. But in that moment of betrayal and heartbreak, something else was born, a fierce determination to survive and to make sure justice was served. Over the next week, as I slowly recovered, I remained mostly silent, observing and planning. Rebecca visited daily, playing the part of the grieving daughter to perfection. She brought flowers, spoke in soothing tones, and even shed tears for the nurses. But I saw through every fake gesture, every crocodile tear. When I was finally discharged 2 weeks later, Rebecca insisted I come stay with them, until I got back on my feet. I agreed, smiling weakly while my mind raced with possibilities. She had no idea that her whispered words had awakened something powerful in me, something that would soon turn her world upside down. As I walked through their front door that first evening home, carrying only a small overnight bag, I looked around at the house I had helped them buy, at the furniture I had helped them afford, at the life I had helped them build. Rebecca hugged me gently, her embrace feeling like a snake's coil. "Welcome home, Mom," she said sweetly. "We're going to take such good care of you." I smiled back, my eyes twinkling with secrets she couldn't imagine. "Oh, darling," I replied softly. "I'm counting on it." What Rebecca didn't know was that during my hospital stay, I had made some very important phone calls of my own. The surprise I had planned for her would arrive in just 3 days, and it would change everything forever. If you're enjoying Martha's story of betrayal and the justice that's coming, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The morning sun streamed through Rebecca's kitchen windows as I sat at the breakfast table, sipping coffee and watching my daughter prepare for what she believed would be another ordinary day. If only she knew that ordinary was about to become a distant memory. "Mom, you're looking so much better today," Rebecca said, her voice dripping with false concern as she buttered her toast. "Your color is returning, and you seem stronger." I nodded weakly, maintaining the fragile facade I had perfected over the past 3 days. "I'm feeling a bit better, dear, though I do worry about being such a burden on you and Mark." "Nonsense," she replied quickly, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. "Your family. We're here for you. Always." The irony wasn't lost on me. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth after what I had overheard in that hospital room. But I continued my performance, playing the grateful, vulnerable mother while my true plans developed in the shadows. Mark emerged from upstairs, adjusting his tie for work. He had always been pleasant enough, but I could see the calculation in his eyes now, the way he looked at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. At 45, he was younger than Rebecca by 2 years, and his ambition had always outweighed his compassion. "Morning, Martha," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you," I replied softly. "I've been thinking about my financial situation, actually. All those medical bills." I watched as both Rebecca and Mark's attention sharpened like hawks, spotting prey. Rebecca moved closer, sitting beside me at the table. "Oh, Mom, you shouldn't worry about that right now," she said, placing her hand over mine. "Focus on getting better. Mark and I can help you sort through everything when you're stronger." "I just feel so guilty," I continued, my voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I've worked so hard to save money over the years. 43 years at the textile factory, saving every penny I could. But these medical expenses, I'm afraid I might lose everything." Mark exchanged a glance with Rebecca that they thought I didn't notice. "Martha," he said, his voice taking on what he probably thought was a reassuring tone. "Maybe we should sit down together and look at your finances. You know, help you organize everything. Make sure you're protected." Protected. The word made my stomach churn. These vultures wanted to protect me right into poverty. "That's so thoughtful of you both," I said, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. "I have all my important papers in my safe deposit box at First National Bank. Bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to my house." Rebecca's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Mom, maybe we should go through those together. Soon. You know, just to make sure everything is in order." I pretended to consider this suggestion carefully. "Well, I suppose that would be wise. I've been meaning to update my will anyway, especially after this health scare. Life is so fragile, isn't it?" The predatory gleam in their eyes intensified. They were practically salivating at the thought of getting their hands on my assets. What they didn't know was that I had already updated my will, just not in the way they were hoping. "That sounds very responsible, Mom," Rebecca said, squeezing my hand. "We want to make sure you're taken care of and that your wishes are respected." My wishes. How touching, considering she had literally asked a doctor to let me die. After Mark left for work, Rebecca became even more attentive, if that was possible. She brought me tea, fluffed my pillows, and asked repeatedly about my comfort. But I could see her mind working, calculating, planning how to separate me from my life's savings. "Mom," she said during lunch, "I've been thinking. This house is getting so expensive to maintain. The property taxes alone are probably killing you. Have you ever considered downsizing?" There it was, the first direct move in their game. "You mean sell my house?" I asked, my voice small and uncertain. "Well, not necessarily sell," she backtracked quickly, "but maybe transfer it to someone who could help maintain it, someone in the family. Mark and I have been thinking about moving to a bigger place anyway, and your house has such wonderful memories." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The house they wanted to help maintain was worth $340,000, according to the latest appraisal I had ordered. They weren't thinking about memories. They were thinking about equity. I don't know," I stammered. "That house has been my life for 35 years. Your father and I bought it when you were just 3 years old. Every room holds a piece of our history. Of course it does, Rebecca soothed, and it always will. But think practically, Mom. If something happened to you, if you needed expensive care, the house would just become a burden. This way, it stays in the family, and you wouldn't have to worry about taxes or maintenance or any of that stress. The manipulation was masterful, I had to admit. She was painting herself as my savior while positioning herself to inherit everything I owned. Maybe you're right, I said slowly, as if the idea was just occurring to me. I am getting older, and managing everything alone is becoming difficult. Rebecca's face brightened with what I'm sure she thought was loving concern, but looked more like greed to my trained eye. We could set up a meeting with a lawyer, she suggested, someone who specializes in elder care and estate planning, just to explore options. That might be wise, I agreed, though I should probably wait until I'm feeling completely better. These medications make it hard to think clearly sometimes. Of course, no rush at all, Rebecca said, though I could see the impatience flickering behind her eyes. As the afternoon wore on, I excused myself for a nap, claiming fatigue. But instead of sleeping, I lay in the guest bedroom thinking about the phone call I had made from the hospital, the call that had set everything in motion. Tomorrow was Friday, and Friday would bring visitors that would change everything. Rebecca thought she was playing chess, moving pieces strategically to capture her prize. What she didn't realize was that I had been playing a different game entirely, one where the rules were about to be rewritten. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a small smile. After decades of being the giving, sacrificing mother, it was time for me to take control. Rebecca wanted to talk about protecting the family assets. Tomorrow she would learn exactly what that meant. The performance was almost over. Soon, it would be time for the real show to begin. Friday morning arrived with the crisp October air that always reminded me why I loved living in Salem. The autumn leaves were beginning their spectacular transformation, painting the neighborhood in brilliant oranges and reds. It was the kind of morning that normally filled me with peace, but today, anticipation coursed through my veins like electricity. Rebecca had left early for her job at the real estate office, promising to return by lunch with some exciting ideas about my housing situation. Mark was at his insurance firm, probably calculating commission percentages on policies they hoped to cash in. Their 16-year-old daughter Emma was at school, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding in her home. I sat in their pristine living room, surrounded by furniture and decor that my money had helped purchase, waiting for the doorbell to ring. At exactly 10:30 a.m., it did. "Mrs. Reynolds?" The tall, distinguished man at the door extended his hand with a warm smile. "I'm James Patterson from Patterson & Associates Legal Services." We spoke on the phone. Behind him stood a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "And I'm Sandra Mitchell from Elder Care Advocacy Services," she introduced herself. "Please, come in," I said, ushering them into the living room. "I've been looking forward to our meeting." As we settled into the seating area, James opened his briefcase and withdrew several documents. "Mrs. Reynolds, I want to commend you for taking proactive steps to protect your interests. Based on our phone conversation and the research we've conducted, you've made some very wise decisions." Sandra nodded in agreement. Financial elder abuse is unfortunately more common than people realize, especially when it involves family members. The fact that you recognized the warning signs and took action shows remarkable strength. "It wasn't easy," I admitted, my voice carrying genuine emotion. "You never expect your own child to view you as a burden to be eliminated." James's expression grew serious. "What you overheard in that hospital room constitutes a clear indication of intent to commit elder abuse. Combined with the financial manipulation attempts you've described, we have grounds for significant legal protection." "Now, let's review what we've put in place," Sandra said, consulting her notes. "First, you've established the Martha Reynolds Irrevocable Trust, which protects your primary assets from any attempts at coercion or undue influence." I nodded, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Yes, the house, my savings account with $127,000, my investment portfolio worth $89,000, and my life insurance policy worth $150,000 are all now protected. "Exactly," James confirmed. "The trust is managed by an independent board, and the beneficiaries have been updated according to your wishes. Your daughter Rebecca is no longer the primary beneficiary." The sound of a key in the front door interrupted our conversation. My heart rate quickened as I heard Rebecca's voice calling out, "Mom, I'm home early. I brought lunch and—" Her voice trailed off as she entered the living room and saw our little gathering. The color drained from Rebecca's face as she took in the scene. Her supposedly vulnerable mother sitting confidently with a lawyer and an elder care advocate, documents spread across the coffee table. "Mom, what's going on here?" she asked, her voice uncertain for the first time in years. I stood up slowly, my posture straighter than it had been in days. "Rebecca, please sit down. I'd like you to meet some people." She remained standing, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. "Who are these people? Mom, you shouldn't be making any important decisions right now. You're still recovering, and you might not be thinking clearly." "Actually," James interjected smoothly, "Mrs. Reynolds has been thinking very clearly. Clearer than she has in years, I'd say." Rebecca's eyes darted between the three of us, and I could see the panic beginning to set in. "I don't understand." "Mom, what have you done?" "What I should have done a long time ago," I replied, my voice steady and strong. "I've protected myself from people who would take advantage of an elderly woman in a vulnerable position." "Take advantage?" Rebecca's voice rose an octave. "Mom, I've been taking care of you. Mark and I opened our home to you. We've been worried sick." "Worried about what exactly?" I asked, stepping closer to her. "Worried about me? Or worried about how long it might take for me to die so you could inherit my money?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Sandra spoke up gently but firmly. "Mrs. Walker, we're aware of the conversation you had with Dr. Harrison at Salem General Hospital. The conversation where you suggested he should let nature take its course rather than treat your mother's heart condition." Rebecca's face went white as snow. You were awake?" "Wide awake," I confirmed, "and listening to every word as my own daughter essentially asked a doctor to let me die so she could get her hands on my inheritance faster." I didn't mean it like that," Rebecca stammered. "I was emotional. I was scared." "You were calculating," James said, consulting his notes. "Our investigation shows that you've been researching the value of your mother's assets for months. You've contacted real estate agents about her property value, inquired about her life insurance policy, and even visited elder care facilities to check pricing." Rebecca sank into a chair as if her legs could no longer support her. "How did you—" "I may be 62, but I'm not stupid," I said firmly. "I've spent the last 3 days watching you and Mark circle around me like vultures, trying to manipulate me into signing over my life's savings. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" The front door opened again, and Mark's voice called out, "Honey, whose car is in the driveway?" When he appeared in the living room and saw our gathering, the same look of panic crossed his features. "Mr. Walker," Sandra addressed him directly, "please join us. We were just explaining to your wife how financial elder abuse works and why it's both morally reprehensible and legally actionable." Mark loosened his tie as if it was suddenly choking him. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I said, my voice carrying 43 years of hard-earned authority, "was thinking that you could manipulate and exploit me without consequences." James opened another folder. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, you're both being served with cease and desist orders. Any further attempts to coerce Mrs. Reynolds into signing financial documents, transferring property, or making changes to her estate will result in immediate legal action." "But Mom," Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper now, "you can't do this. We're your family. We love you." I looked at this woman I had raised, this stranger who wore my daughter's face but had the heart of a predator, and felt something inside me finally break free. "Love?" I asked quietly. "You asked a doctor to let me die, Rebecca. You planned to steal my house. You calculated the value of my life insurance policy while I was fighting for my life. That's not love. That's something else entirely." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, the clock I had bought them for their 10th wedding anniversary. Sandra stood up and handed Rebecca a business card. "Mrs. Walker, if you'd like to repair your relationship with your mother, I suggest you start with some serious soul-searching and possibly family counseling, but any financial discussions are now off the table permanently." As our visitors prepared to leave, James turned to me one final time. "Mrs. Reynolds, remember that you're in complete control now. Your assets are protected, your wishes are documented, and you have legal recourse if anyone attempts to pressure you." After they left, I stood in the living room looking at Rebecca and Mark, who seemed to have shrunk before my eyes. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and we all knew it. "Pack your things, Mom," Rebecca said finally, her voice flat and defeated. "I think you'd better leave." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Oh, darling," I said sweetly. "I was hoping you'd say that." The silence that followed Rebecca's demand for me to leave was broken only by the sound of Mark's heavy breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I could see both of them struggling to process what had just transpired, their carefully laid plans crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "You can't just kick Mom out," Mark said suddenly, his voice strained. "She just got out of the hospital. What will people think?" Rebecca whirled on him with fury blazing in her eyes. "What will people think? Mark, she just destroyed us. Do you understand what just happened here? She's cut us out of everything." "Not everything," I corrected calmly, settling back into my chair with the confidence of someone who finally held all the cards. "I've simply protected what's mine from people who would steal it from me." "Steal?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "We're your family. Everything you have should come to us anyway." The entitlement in her voice was staggering. "Should it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Tell me, Rebecca, what have you done to earn it?" "What have I done?" She paced across the room like a caged animal. "I've been your daughter for 38 years. I took care of you when Dad died. I invited you to every holiday, every birthday. You invited me to pay for every holiday and birthday," I interrupted. "Let's be honest about what our relationship has really been, shall we?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a small notebook I had been keeping for years. "Would you like me to read you some numbers, dear?" Mark and Rebecca exchanged worried glances as I opened the worn pages. "Your college education, $45,000 out of my own pocket when your scholarships weren't enough. Your wedding, $23,000 for what you called the perfect day. Down payment on this house, $30,000 because you just had to have it. Emma's private school tuition when she was struggling in public school, $18,000 per year for 3 years, so $54,000 total." Rebecca's face was getting redder with each figure I mentioned. "Your car when yours broke down 2 years ago, $15,000. Mark's business loan when the bank turned him down, $25,000. Emma's orthodontics, $8,000. Should I continue?" "Those were gifts," Rebecca protested. "You offered." "I offered because I loved you and wanted to help my family succeed," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "But gifts are given freely, with love. What you've been planning is theft, plain and simple." Mark finally found his voice. "Martha, maybe we can work this out. Maybe there was a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding, Mark, is that you believed I was a senile old woman you could manipulate," I replied. "But I've been managing money longer than you've been alive. I've been making difficult decisions since before you were born. Did you really think I wouldn't see through your little scheme?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I had helped them build their dream life. "Do you know what the real tragedy is? If you had simply loved me, truly loved me, you would have inherited everything eventually anyway. I'm 62, not immortal. But your greed couldn't wait for nature to take its course." "So what happens now?" Rebecca asked, her voice small and defeated. I turned back to face them both. "Now you learn to live within your means, like most people do. You get jobs that actually pay your bills. You stop expecting handouts from family members. You grow up. And if we can't make our mortgage payments?" Mark asked quietly. "Then you sell the house and find something you can afford," I replied without hesitation. "The same thing millions of people do when they overextend themselves financially." Rebecca sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "I can't believe you're doing this to us. We're going to lose everything." "You're going to lose everything you couldn't afford in the first place," I corrected. "Everything that was built on the expectation of my death. How does that feel, Rebecca? Knowing that your comfortable lifestyle was dependent on me dying?" "That's not fair," she whispered. "Fair?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair. Fair is working 3 jobs to put yourself through nursing school while raising a baby alone after your father died. Fair is saving every penny for 43 years, denying yourself luxuries so you could have security in your old age. Fair is helping your child succeed and then having her literally pray for your death so she can cash in." Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, but I felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of loss. loss of the windfall she had been counting on. "So where will you go?" Mark asked, perhaps trying to inject some practicality into the emotional turmoil. "Back to my house," I said simply. "The house you wanted me to sign over to you. The house that's now protected in a trust that will ensure it's used for my care and comfort for as long as I live." "And after?" Rebecca looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "After I die, the house and all remaining assets will go to Emma's education fund and various charities I care about, organizations that actually help people instead of exploiting them." The impact of this revelation hit them like a physical blow. Mark actually staggered backward. "You're giving our daughter's inheritance to charity?" Rebecca's voice rose to a near shriek. "I'm ensuring that Emma has the opportunity for a good education without the burden of parents who taught her that family members are sources of income rather than sources of love," I replied firmly. "You can't do this to Emma. She's your granddaughter. Emma will receive exactly what she needs for college and nothing more," I said. "What she won't receive is the message that manipulation and greed are acceptable family values." I moved toward the guest bedroom to collect my few belongings. "I'll be out of your house within the hour. After that, I suggest you both start looking for jobs that actually pay living wages." "Wait," Rebecca called after me. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work things out. You can't just throw away 38 years. I paused in the doorway and looked back at her. "Rebecca, you threw away 38 years the moment you asked that doctor to let me die. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen." As I packed my small bag, I could hear them arguing in heated whispers in the living room. Mark was blaming Rebecca for being too obvious. Rebecca was blaming Mark for pushing too hard too fast. Neither of them was taking responsibility for the fundamental cruelty of their actions. 20 minutes later, I emerged from the guest room with my belongings. A taxi was already waiting in the driveway. I had called while they were arguing. "This isn't over," Rebecca said as I headed for the door. I turned back one final time. "You're absolutely right. It's not over. It's just beginning. You wanted to learn about managing assets and protecting wealth? Consider this your first lesson. Don't bite the hand that feeds you." As the taxi pulled away from the house I had helped them buy, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom. For the first time in decades, I was beholden to no one, responsible for no one's dreams but my own. But I wasn't finished with Rebecca and Mark. Not by a long shot. They wanted to play financial games? They were about to learn that I had been playing this game since before they were born, and I played to win. The real surprise was still coming. The taxi pulled up to my house on Elm Street, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the familiar front yard. After 10 days away, the sight of my own home filled me with a relief so profound it nearly brought tears to my eyes. This was my sanctuary, my fortress, and now it was truly protected. "That'll be $12.50, the driver said, helping me with my small bag. I handed him $15 and took a moment to appreciate the sight of my own front door. The house itself wasn't grand, a modest 3-bedroom colonial built in 1962, but it represented something priceless: independence earned through decades of hard work and careful saving. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of home enveloped me. Everything was exactly as I had left it before that terrible night when the heart attack struck. My reading glasses still sat on the side table next to my favorite chair. My coffee cup still waited in the dish drainer, and the photo of my late husband Robert still smiled at me from the mantelpiece. "Well, Robert," I said aloud to his picture, "you always said Rebecca had too much of her mother's stubbornness and not enough of your compassion. Turns out you were only half right." I settled into my recliner and allowed myself a few minutes to simply breathe. The chaos of the last 2 weeks, the heart attack, the betrayal, the legal maneuvering, had been exhausting. But now, in the quiet of my own home, I could finally process what had really happened and what came next. The phone rang, breaking my contemplation. I let it ring twice before answering, savoring the simple pleasure of choosing whether or not to take a call in my own home. "Hello? Mrs. Reynolds? This is Sandra Mitchell. I wanted to check in and see how you're settling back in." "Much better, thank you," I replied. "It feels good to be home." "I imagine it does. I also wanted to update you on a few things. Your daughter attempted to contact our office this afternoon." I wasn't surprised. "Oh, what did she want?" "She was asking about the legality of the trust you established, whether there were grounds to contest it. She seemed to be under the impression that your health condition might invalidate your recent decisions. A laugh escaped me. Not a bitter laugh, but one of genuine amusement. And what did you tell her? That the medical and psychological evaluations we arranged clearly demonstrate your mental competency, and that the trust was established with full legal authority. I also reminded her that any attempts to contest your decisions could result in harassment charges. Good, though I suspect this is just the beginning. You're probably right, Sandra agreed. People who are willing to commit elder abuse rarely give up easily when their plans are thwarted. That's why I want to discuss some additional protective measures. Over the next 20 minutes, Sandra outlined a comprehensive plan for my security and independence. This included regular check-ins from a trusted neighbor, a medical alert system, and a detailed documentation process for any contact attempts from Rebecca or Mark. The goal, she explained, is to ensure that you can live independently while having multiple layers of protection against manipulation or coercion. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down with my financial records. For the first time in years, I wasn't reviewing my accounts to see how I could help someone else. I was simply enjoying the satisfaction of a lifetime's worth of careful money management. The numbers told a story of discipline and sacrifice. Starting as a single mother making $3.50 an hour at the textile factory, I had built my wealth penny by penny. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every generic brand purchase had contributed to my financial security. The $127,000 in my savings account represented 43 years of choosing security over immediate gratification. My investment portfolio, now worth $89,000, had started with a $50 monthly contribution when Rebecca was in high school. I had educated myself about mutual funds and market trends, slowly building a diversified portfolio that had weathered multiple economic downturns. The house, purchased for $18,000 in 1975, was now worth $340,000 according to the recent appraisal. But its real value couldn't be measured in dollars. It represented stability, independence, and the freedom to make my own choices. As evening approached, I prepared a simple dinner for myself, something I hadn't done in weeks. As I chopped vegetables for a stir-fry, my mind wandered to Emma. My granddaughter was the one innocent victim in this whole mess, and I needed to find a way to maintain our relationship without enabling her parents' behavior. The phone rang again, and this time the caller ID showed Emma's cell phone number. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered warmly. "Grandma?" Emma's voice was small and confused. "Mom said you moved out because you were angry with us. She's been crying all afternoon." My heart ached for this child who was being used as a pawn in her parents' emotional manipulation. "Oh, honey, I'm not angry with you at all. I'm back at my own house now, and I'd love for you to come visit soon. But Mom says you might not want to see us anymore. She says you've been talking to lawyers and that you're trying to hurt our family." The audacity of Rebecca using Emma this way made my blood boil, but I kept my voice calm and loving. "Emma, your parents and I have some adult problems that have nothing to do with you. I will always love you, and I will always want you in my life." "Then why did you leave? Why is everyone so upset?" I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults make mistakes, and those mistakes have consequences. Your parents made some choices that hurt my feelings very badly, and now I need to protect myself. But that doesn't change how much I love you. Can I come see you this weekend? Mom says we can't visit your house anymore. Your mother can't stop you from visiting your grandmother, I said firmly. You're 16 years old, and you have the right to maintain a relationship with me. If you want to come this weekend, I'll pick you up. Really? The relief in her voice was palpable. Really? We'll have lunch and maybe work on that photo album project we started last summer. After we hung up, I felt renewed purpose. Rebecca and Mark had tried to use my love for my family against me, counting on my desire to maintain relationships to make me vulnerable to their schemes. But they had miscalculated. My love for Emma was precisely why I couldn't allow them to succeed. I spent the evening going through old photo albums, remembering happier times when Rebecca's calls were about sharing good news rather than calculating my net worth. There were pictures of family vacations I had funded, graduations I had celebrated, birthdays where my gifts had brought genuine smiles to Rebecca's face. But those days were gone now, buried under years of increasing demands and decreasing gratitude. The woman in those photos had slowly transformed into someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of asking a doctor to let her mother die for financial gain. As I prepared for bed in my own bedroom for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace of mind. My assets were protected, my independence was secured, and my future was entirely in my own hands. But I also knew this was just the calm before the storm. Rebecca and Mark wouldn't give up easily, and their next moves would likely be more desperate and potentially more dangerous. I was ready for them. Saturday morning brought an unwelcome surprise in the form of a silver Mercedes pulling into my driveway at 7:30 a.m. Through my bedroom window, I watched Mark emerge from the driver's seat, followed by Rebecca and, to my dismay, Emma. I took my time getting dressed, brushing my teeth, and making coffee before answering their insistent knocking. When I finally opened the door, Rebecca pushed past me without invitation, her face a mask of determination and barely controlled rage. "We need to talk," she announced, striding into my living room as if she still had some authority here. Emma hung back uncertainly in the doorway. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied, giving her a genuine smile. "Why don't you go start some hot chocolate in the kitchen while the adults talk?" Mark closed the door behind them and positioned himself near it, as if blocking my exit. The intimidation tactic was laughably transparent. "Mom, we've been thinking about everything that happened yesterday," Rebecca began, her tone artificially sweet. "We realized there may have been some misunderstandings, some poor communication." "The only misunderstanding," I interrupted, "was thinking I was too weak or too stupid to protect myself from my own daughter's greed." Rebecca's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the anger underneath. "We're family, Mom. Families work things out. They don't bring in lawyers and destroy each other." "You're absolutely right," I said, settling into my favorite chair. "Families don't destroy each other. So why did you try to convince a doctor to let me die?" Mark stepped forward, trying to play peacemaker. "Martha, Rebecca was under tremendous stress. She wasn't thinking clearly. People say things they don't mean when they're scared and emotional." "Scared of what exactly?" I asked. "Scared that I might recover and continue living my own life with my own money?" "That's not fair," Rebecca protested. "I was scared of losing you. I couldn't bear to watch you suffer." "You couldn't bear to watch your inheritance suffer, you mean?" The pretense of family reconciliation evaporated instantly. Rebecca's face hardened, and her voice took on the cold, calculating tone I had heard in that hospital room. "Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. I've been your daughter for 38 years. I've been there for every holiday, every birthday, every important moment. I've included you in our family, made you part of our lives. You've used me as a bank account," I corrected. "There's a difference. I've researched the law, Mom. Children have rights when their elderly parents start making irrational financial decisions. There are legal processes for protecting seniors from making harmful choices." The threat was clear, and it was exactly what I had been expecting. I smiled calmly. "Are you threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent, Rebecca?" "I'm saying that a 62-year-old woman who just suffered a major heart attack might not be in the best position to make life-altering financial decisions, especially when those decisions hurt her own family." Mark nodded in agreement. "There are precedents, Martha. Adult children can petition the court when they believe their parent is being taken advantage of or making decisions that aren't in their best interest." I laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise all three of them. "Oh, this is precious. You're going to argue that protecting my money from people who want to steal it is evidence of mental incompetence?" "You're not protecting it," Rebecca shot back. "You're giving it to strangers, charities, people who don't even know you, people who haven't asked me to die for their financial benefit," I replied evenly. From the kitchen, Emma's voice called out uncertainly, "Grandma, do you have any marshmallows?" "Top shelf of the pantry, sweetheart," I called back, then turned my attention back to her parents. "I assume you brought Emma as emotional leverage? To make me feel guilty about hurting the family?" Rebecca had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Emma deserves to understand what's happening to her family. What's happening to her family is that her parents overextended themselves financially based on the assumption that her grandmother would die and leave them money. Now that assumption has proven false. They're scrambling to find a way to force the outcome they wanted." Mark pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. "We've already contacted an elder law attorney, Martha. We have an appointment Monday morning to discuss our options. Excellent, I replied cheerfully. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about your conversation with Dr. Harrison. Elder abuse attorneys are particularly keen on cases involving family members who encourage medical professionals to provide substandard care. The color drained from Mark's face. That's not… You weren't what? Recorded? Oh, but you were. I smiled sweetly. Hospital rooms have security cameras, Mark, and I've obtained copies of the footage from that day. This was a bluff. I had no such footage, but the panic in their eyes told me they weren't certain about the hospital's security protocols. Rebecca sank onto my sofa as if her legs could no longer support her. You're bluffing. Am I? Would you like to take that chance in court? Would you like to explain to a judge why you encouraged a doctor to provide substandard care to your elderly mother, who was fighting for her life? Emma appeared in the doorway with her hot chocolate, her young face creased with confusion and worry. Why is everyone talking about lawyers and courts? What's going on? The sight of my granddaughter, innocent and caught in the middle of this ugliness, filled me with both love and determination. She deserved better than parents who viewed family members as income sources. Emma, honey, I said gently, your parents and I are having a disagreement about money. Sometimes adults have different ideas about what's fair and what's right. But your family, Emma said simply. Can't you just forgive each other and work it out? Forgiveness requires remorse, sweetheart. And remorse requires acknowledging that you've done something wrong. Rebecca stood up abruptly. Fine. You want to destroy your own family over money? Go ahead. But don't expect us to keep pretending we're one big happy family when you've made it clear that strangers matter more to you than your own blood. My own blood asked a doctor to let me die, I reminded her quietly. That's not family, Rebecca. That's something else entirely. As they prepared to leave, Mark made one final attempt at negotiation. What would it take, Martha? What would we have to do to make this right? I considered the question seriously. Time travel, I said finally. You'd have to go back and undo the moment when you decided my death was worth more than my life. Since that's impossible, we're left with the consequences of your choices. After they left, Emma having given me a confused but loving hug goodbye, I sat in my quiet living room and felt the weight of what had just transpired. They would try to have me declared incompetent. I was certain of that now, but I had anticipated this move and prepared for it. I picked up my phone and dialed James Patterson's number. It was time to implement the next phase of my protection plan. James, it's Martha Reynolds. They just threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. I think it's time we moved to phase 2. I was wondering when they'd try that approach, he replied. Don't worry, Martha. We're ready for them. In fact, I think they're going to be very surprised by what they discover when they start this legal battle. Oh? Let's just say that people who commit elder abuse shouldn't throw stones in glass houses. I'll explain everything when we meet Tuesday. But for now, just document everything they say and do. We're going to need it. As I hung up, I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. Rebecca and Mark thought they were escalating the conflict, but they were actually walking into a trap that had been carefully prepared for them. They wanted to play legal games? They were about to learn that I had been planning this chess match for much longer than they realized. Tuesday afternoon found me sitting in James Patterson's law office, surrounded by file folders, legal documents, and what appeared to be a substantial investigation into my daughter's life. The mahogany conference table was covered with papers that would have made Rebecca very uncomfortable. Mrs. Reynolds, James began, settling into his chair across from me. I have some interesting updates about your daughter and son-in-law's financial situation. Our investigation has revealed some concerning patterns. Sandra Mitchell, who had joined us for this meeting, opened her laptop and pulled up a series of documents. Martha, when you told us about their lifestyle and spending habits, we decided to do some digging. What we found suggests that their interest in your assets goes beyond simple greed. Oh? I leaned forward, intrigued. James slid a document across the table to me. This is Mark's credit report. He and Rebecca are in significantly more debt than they've let on. Their mortgage payment is $2,800 per month, and they're currently 3 months behind. I studied the numbers, my years of financial management making the implications immediately clear. 3 months behind on a $2,800 payment means they owe $8,400 in back payments, plus penalties and fees, Sandra confirmed. But that's just the beginning. She handed me another document. Credit card debt totaling $47,000 across 6 different cards. Rebecca's BMW payment is $680 per month, and they're 2 months behind on that as well. Their property taxes are $6,200 annually, and those haven't been paid this year, James added. Emma's private school tuition is $18,000 per year, and they owe $12,000 for this semester alone. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as the full picture emerged. How much total debt are we talking about? Approximately $127,000 in various debts, not including the remaining mortgage balance of $180,000, Sandra replied. They're essentially bankrupt, Martha. They've been living on credit and anticipated inheritance for years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their total debt almost exactly matched my life savings, the savings they had been planning to inherit. There's more, James continued, his expression growing more serious. Mark's insurance business is also in trouble. He's being investigated by the State Insurance Commission for selling policies under false pretenses. If convicted, he could face both criminal charges and the loss of his license. And Rebecca? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Rebecca's real estate license is under review for ethical violations. Apparently, she's been using her access to MLS listings to identify elderly homeowners with significant equity, then targeting them with unsolicited offers that significantly undervalue their properties. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My daughter wasn't just greedy. She was actively preying on vulnerable elderly people for a living. How long have they been doing this? I asked quietly. Based on the complaints filed with the Real Estate Commission, at least 2 years, Sandra replied. They've successfully convinced 3 elderly homeowners to sell their properties for approximately 40% below market value. The profits from those transactions have been keeping them afloat financially. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. The woman I had raised, the daughter I had sacrificed for, was running what amounted to an elder abuse scam. The good news, James said, is that this information makes their threat to have you declared incompetent not just frivolous, but potentially criminal. People who are themselves under investigation for elder abuse don't have much credibility when they claim to be protecting an elderly parent. What's our next move? I asked. Sandra opened another file. We're going to beat them to the courthouse. Tomorrow morning, we're filing a restraining order against both Rebecca and Mark, citing attempted financial elder abuse and harassment. We're also filing a formal complaint with the district attorney's office regarding their hospital room conversation with Dr. Harrison. Additionally, James added, we're requesting a formal investigation into their elder abuse scam. The Real Estate Commission is very interested in working with us on this, especially since it appears they've been operating this scheme for quite some time. The phone on James's desk buzzed, and his secretary's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Patterson? You have a call from a Mark Walker. He says it's urgent and regarding the Reynolds case. James and I exchanged glances. Put him through, James said. Mr. Patterson? This is Mark Walker. I understand you're representing my mother-in-law, Martha Reynolds. That's correct. What can I do for you, Mr. Walker? I think there's been a misunderstanding. My wife and I love Martha very much, and we're concerned that she may be making decisions that aren't in her best interest. We'd like to arrange a family meeting to discuss this situation like adults. James put the call on speaker and motioned for me to remain quiet. What kind of decisions are you concerned about, Mr. Walker? Well, this trust she's established, for instance, and cutting her family out of her will. These are the actions of someone who may not be thinking clearly. We think she may be being influenced by people who don't have her best interests at heart. The audacity was breathtaking. They were essentially accusing James and Sandra of the very crime they themselves had committed. Mr. Walker, are you suggesting that Mrs. Reynolds is mentally incompetent? I'm suggesting that a 62-year-old woman who just suffered a major heart attack might be vulnerable to manipulation. We're considering legal action to protect her from making decisions she might regret later. James smiled grimly. I see. And you feel that you and your wife are better positioned to make decisions about Mrs. Reynolds' finances? We're her family. We love her. We want what's best for her. Mr. Walker, I'm going to stop you right there. Any further contact with Mrs. Reynolds outside of formal legal channels will be considered harassment. Any attempts to influence her financial decisions will be reported to the authorities as attempted elder abuse. Do I make myself clear? There was a long pause. This isn't over, Mark said finally. You're absolutely right, James replied. It's not over. It's just beginning. Have a good day, Mr. Walker. After James hung up, Sandra shook her head in amazement. The nerve of these people is incredible. They're drowning in debt from their own poor decisions. They're being investigated for scamming other elderly people, and they still think they can intimidate you into giving them your money. What they don't realize, I said quietly, is that I've been preparing for this fight my entire life. Every dollar I saved, every sacrifice I made, every lesson I learned about standing up for myself, it was all leading to this moment. James nodded approvingly. Tomorrow, we go on the offensive. By the time we're finished, Rebecca and Mark will be too busy dealing with their own legal problems to worry about your inheritance. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out my own file folder. I've been doing some investigating of my own. I handed them a series of bank statements and canceled checks. These are records of every loan, gift, and payment I've made to Rebecca and Mark over the years. The total comes to $247,000. Sandra whistled low. That's a substantial amount. In Massachusetts, gifts to family members can be reclaimed if they were obtained through fraud or undue influence, I continued. I believe I have grounds to argue that Rebecca manipulated me emotionally over the years to extract these payments under false pretenses. James's eyes lit up with professional interest. You want to sue them for repayment? I want them to understand that theft has consequences, I replied. They thought they could manipulate a vulnerable old woman. Instead, they're about to discover what happens when you try to steal from someone who's been fighting for survival her entire life. The meeting ended with a detailed plan for the next phase of our legal strategy. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the exhilaration of total control over my own destiny. Rebecca and Mark had wanted to play financial games with my life. Tomorrow, they would learn that I played for keeps. Wednesday morning arrived with a knock on my door at precisely 8:15 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see a uniformed sheriff's deputy holding official-looking documents. The restraining orders had been served. Mrs. Reynolds, I have some documents for a Rebecca Walker and Mark Walker. The address I have is 423 Oak Street, but nobody's answering the door there. They're probably at work, I replied, opening the door. Rebecca works at Coastal Realty on Main Street, and Mark has an office in the Riverside Insurance Building. Thank you, ma'am. They'll be served by noon today. As the deputy drove away, my phone rang. It was Sandra Mitchell, and her voice carried barely contained excitement. Martha, you're not going to believe what happened this morning. The district attorney's office received an anonymous tip about Rebecca and Mark's real estate scam. Someone provided them with detailed documentation of at least 6 cases where elderly homeowners were defrauded. Anonymous tip? I asked, though I suspected I knew the source. One of their previous victims, an 82-year-old woman named Helen Morrison, apparently kept detailed records of her interactions with Rebecca. Mrs. Morrison's nephew is a retired FBI agent, and he's been building a case against them for months. The poetic justice was delicious. Rebecca's pattern of preying on vulnerable elderly people had finally caught up with her. There's more, Sandra continued. The State Insurance Commission has fast-tracked their investigation into Mark's business practices. Apparently, he's been selling life insurance policies to elderly clients by convincing them their children would be financially devastated without the policies. Then he's been collecting unusually high commissions by steering them toward expensive, unnecessary products. I settled into my recliner, savoring each revelation. How long before they face formal charges? The DA's office is moving quickly. They expect to file charges within the week. Both Rebecca and Mark are looking at potential felony convictions for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down to review my own plans for the day. At 2 p.m., I had an appointment with the bank to discuss my financial portfolio. At 4 p.m., I was meeting with a contractor to discuss some home improvements I had been putting off for years. For the first time in decades, I was spending money on myself instead of my ungrateful daughter and her scheming husband. At exactly 11:30 a.m., my phone exploded with calls. First Rebecca, then Mark, then Rebecca again. I let them all go to voicemail, then listened to the messages with considerable amusement. Rebecca's first message was panic mixed with rage. Mom, what the hell did you do? The police just served us with restraining orders. You can't do this to your own family. Mark's message was more controlled, but equally desperate. Martha, we need to talk. There are some serious misunderstandings here that need to be cleared up before this gets out of hand. Rebecca's second message revealed that they had discovered the scope of the investigation. Mom, They're investigating us for things that have nothing to do with you. This is insane. You have to call them off." I deleted all the messages without responding. At 1 p.m., Emma called from school. "Grandma? Mom asked me to call you. She's really upset and scared. She says you're trying to have her and Dad arrested." My heart ached for Emma, caught in the middle of this mess through no fault of her own. "Sweetheart, your parents are in trouble because of choices they made, not because of anything I did. They've been hurting other people, and now they have to face the consequences." "But they're good people," Emma protested. "They take care of me. They work hard." "I know you love them, honey, and they love you too in their own way. But loving someone doesn't mean you ignore it when they do wrong things." "Will they go to jail?" The question broke my heart, but I couldn't lie to her. "I don't know, Emma. That depends on what they've done and what the courts decide. But no matter what happens, you'll always have me. You'll always have a home, always have someone who loves you unconditionally. Can I come stay with you?" "Anytime you need to, sweetheart. Anytime at all." After school, Emma appeared at my door with an overnight bag and red-rimmed eyes. "Mom and Dad are meeting with lawyers," she said quietly. "The house feels really scary right now." I welcomed her with open arms, and we spent the evening cooking dinner together and working on photo albums. It was peaceful in a way that reminded me why family should be about love and support, not financial manipulation. At 8 p.m., Rebecca called from her lawyer's office. This time, I answered. "Mom, please, you have to help us. They're saying we could go to prison." "Prison? For what?" "For trying to help elderly people sell their houses?" "For defrauding elderly people," I corrected. "For convincing them to sell their homes for far less than they were worth so you could profit from their vulnerability." "That's not what happened." "Rebecca, I've seen the documentation. 6 victims so far, with losses totaling over $200,000. You've been running a scam that targets the most vulnerable members of our community." "We needed the money. We were desperate. The house, Emma's school, all our bills." "So you decided to steal from other people's grandmothers?" The line went quiet for a long moment. "What do you want from us, Mom? What will it take to make this stop?" For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Rebecca sounded genuinely broken, but it was too late for sympathy. "I want you to face the consequences of your actions," I said quietly. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't manipulate and steal from people without eventually paying a price." "And Emma? What about Emma? She doesn't deserve to have her life destroyed because we made some mistakes." "Emma will be fine. She has a grandmother who actually loves her, not one who sees her as a meal ticket." "You're destroying our family." "No, Rebecca. You destroyed our family the moment you asked a doctor to let me die. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen." As I hung up, Emma looked at me with wise eyes that seemed far too old for her 16 years. "They really did all those things, didn't they?" she asked quietly. I nodded sadly. "I'm afraid so, sweetheart." "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry they hurt you. You have nothing to apologize for, Emma. You're the only good thing that came out of this whole mess." That night, as Emma slept peacefully in my guest room, I reflected on the events of the past few weeks. Rebecca and Mark had thought they could manipulate a vulnerable old woman into signing over her life savings. Instead, they had awakened something fierce and uncompromising, a woman who had spent 62 years learning how to survive and protect what was hers. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more consequences for their actions. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own home, with my granddaughter safe under my roof and my future entirely in my own hands. The predators had become the prey, and justice was finally being served. Friday morning brought news that felt like a vindication 40 years in the making. James Patterson called at 8 a.m., his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "Martha, they've been arrested." Both Rebecca and Mark were taken into custody this morning on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The DA's office moved faster than we anticipated. I set down my coffee cup carefully, not trusting my hands to remain steady. "What exactly are the charges?" "Rebecca is facing 4 felony counts of real estate fraud and 2 counts of elder abuse. Mark has 6 counts of insurance fraud and 3 counts of elder abuse. If convicted on all counts, they're each looking at 8 to 12 years in prison." Emma had stayed with me for the past 2 nights, and I could hear her moving around upstairs getting ready for school. I kept my voice low, wanting to protect her from the full implications of what was happening to her parents. "What about bail?" set at $75,000 each. Given their financial situation, I doubt they can raise that kind of money. The irony was perfect. They had been so focused on stealing my money that they had neglected to save any of their own for emergencies. Their greed had become their downfall. There's something else, James continued. The investigation has uncovered evidence that this scam goes back at least 4 years. The Financial Crimes Unit estimates that Rebecca and Mark have defrauded elderly victims out of nearly $400,000 total. The number hit me like a physical blow. $400,000 stolen from people like me, people who had worked their entire lives to build security for their old age, only to have it stripped away by predators wearing friendly faces. Martha, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. I'm just processing the scope of what they've done. The victims are mostly widows and widowers between the ages of 70 and 85. People who trusted Rebecca because she seemed like such a nice young woman. People who believed Mark when he told them their children would be devastated financially if they didn't buy expensive life insurance policies. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed for school and carrying her backpack. Her young face looked older than it should, marked by the stress of the past week. Grandma? Was that about Mom and Dad? I nodded, not wanting to lie to her. They've been arrested, sweetheart. She sank into a kitchen chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Are they really going to prison? I don't know yet. That depends on what happens in court. Can I still go to school today? I don't think I can handle everyone asking questions. Of course you can stay home. We'll call it a mental health day. After James and I finished our conversation, I sat with Emma at the kitchen table and tried to explain the unexplainable. Your parents made some very bad choices, I said gently. They hurt a lot of people, including me. Now they have to face the consequences of those choices. But they're not monsters, Emma protested. They love me. They've always taken care of me. People can love their families and still do terrible things to other people's families, I replied. Your parents convinced elderly people to give up their homes and their security. Those people had children and grandchildren too, but your parents didn't care about destroying those families. Emma was quiet for a long time, processing this information with the kind of maturity that broke my heart. What's going to happen to me? She asked finally. You're going to stay with me for as long as you need to. You're going to finish school, go to college, and build a life based on honesty and hard work instead of manipulation and theft. Will I have enough money for college? I smiled, remembering the education fund I had established. You'll have exactly what you need for college, Emma. Not more, not less. You'll learn the value of earning what you have. That afternoon, Sandra Mitchell stopped by with updates on the legal proceedings and some unexpected news. The victims of Rebecca and Mark's scam have formed a support group, she told me. They want to thank you for coming forward and stopping the operation before more people could be hurt. I'd like to meet them, I said immediately. I was hoping you'd say that. They're meeting tomorrow afternoon at the community center. Several of them have asked specifically to meet the woman who brought their attackers to justice. The next day, I found myself in a room with 8 elderly people whose stories were heartbreakingly familiar. There was Helen Morrison, the 82-year-old whose nephew had provided evidence to the DA. She had lost $47,000 when Rebecca convinced her to sell her home for far below market value. There was Frank Rodriguez, a 76-year-old widower who had bought a $200,000 life insurance policy from Mark that he couldn't afford and didn't need, draining his savings to pay the premiums. Each person had a similar story, a friendly young couple who had seemed so concerned about their welfare, who had convinced them to make financial decisions that devastated their security. Mrs. Reynolds, Helen said, her voice shaking with emotion. If you hadn't stopped them, how many more of us would have lost everything? The question haunted me. How many more grandmothers would have been left with nothing? How many more grandfathers would have died in poverty because they trusted the wrong people? The important thing is that it's over now, I replied. They can't hurt anyone else. As the meeting ended, Frank Rodriguez approached me privately. Mrs. Reynolds, I heard that Rebecca is your daughter. This must be incredibly difficult for you. I considered his words carefully. It is difficult, I admitted. But you know what would have been more difficult? Knowing that I could have stopped them and chose not to because of family loyalty. There's a difference between love and enabling, Mr. Rodriguez. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions. That evening, as Emma and I prepared dinner together, she asked the question I had been dreading. Grandma, Do you think Mom and Dad will ever forgive you for this? I stopped chopping vegetables and looked at my granddaughter, this beautiful, innocent girl who was trying so hard to understand an incomprehensible situation. Emma, forgiveness isn't something you earn by letting people hurt you repeatedly. Forgiveness comes after acknowledgement, after remorse, after genuine change. Your parents aren't angry with me because I wronged them. They're angry because I stopped them from wronging others. But they're still my parents. I still love them. And you should love them. They're your parents, and despite their flaws, they've loved you and cared for you. But loving someone doesn't mean ignoring the harm they cause to others. As we sat down to dinner in my quiet kitchen, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 3 weeks ago, I had been a naive woman who trusted her family completely. Today, I was someone who understood that trust must be earned and that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's enablement. Rebecca and Mark were facing the consequences of their choices. Emma was safe and would be provided for. The elderly victims of their scam could begin to heal, knowing that justice had been served. And me? For the first time in decades, I was free to live my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who loved me for who I was rather than what I could give them. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the cycle of exploitation had been broken. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse hallway waiting for the sentencing hearing that would close this chapter of our lives forever. Rebecca and Mark had pled guilty to all charges in exchange for reduced sentences, but they were still facing significant prison time. Emma, now 17 and living with me full-time, sat beside me on the wooden bench. She had grown tremendously over these months, developing a strength and maturity that reminded me of myself at her age. The naive girl who had believed her parents could do no wrong had evolved into a young woman who understood that love sometimes requires difficult choices. "Are you ready for this?" I asked her gently. She nodded, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I wrote them a letter," she said quietly, "for the victim impact statements. I wanted them to understand how their choices affected everyone, not just the people they stole from." The courtroom was packed with victims and their families. Helen Morrison sat in the front row, her nephew beside her for support. Frank Rodriguez had brought his adult son. Each person represented a family that had been devastated by Rebecca and Mark's greed, and each face told a story of betrayal and recovery. When Rebecca and Mark were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Rebecca looked older than her 38 years, her designer clothes replaced by a standard orange jumpsuit. Mark appeared haggard and defeated, his once confident demeanor completely shattered. Judge Patricia Hawkins, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, called the court to order. "Before I proceed with sentencing, I want to read a portion of one of the victim impact statements received by this court," she began. This statement was written by Emma Walker, the 17-year-old daughter of the defendants. Emma's hand found mine as the judge began to read her words. "Your Honor, my parents are not evil people, but they did evil things. They taught me that family was the most important thing in the world, but then they tried to destroy my grandmother's life for money. They taught me that hard work was valuable, but then they built their lifestyle by stealing from people who had worked hard their entire lives. I love my parents, but I cannot and will not defend their actions. They need to face consequences, not just for the people they hurt, but so they can learn to be the people they should have been all along." The courtroom was silent as Judge Hawkins finished reading. I squeezed Emma's hand, proud of her courage and wisdom. When it came time for sentencing, Judge Hawkins was thorough and unflinching. "Rebecca Walker, you used your position as a real estate professional to prey upon some of our community's most vulnerable members. You betrayed not only your professional ethics, but the basic human decency we expect from members of our society. I sentence you to 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to your victims, totaling $187,000. Rebecca's legs buckled, and she had to be supported by her public defender. The reality of 8 years away from Emma, 8 years of her life lost to the consequences of her greed, hit her with visible force. "Mark Walker," the judge continued, "your crimes are equally reprehensible. You exploited elderly clients' love for their families, convincing them to purchase unnecessary insurance products that drained their life savings. You are sentenced to 7 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, and ordered to pay restitution of $213,000 to your victims. As the bailiffs prepared to lead them away, Rebecca turned toward Emma and me. Tears streamed down her face as she mouthed, "I'm sorry," to her daughter. But it was too little, too late. Emma remained composed until we left the courthouse, but once we were in my car, she finally broke down. "I know they deserved it," she sobbed. "I know they hurt all those people. But they're still my parents, and now they're going to be in prison until I'm 24 years old." I held her while she cried, understanding that grief and justice could coexist in the same heart. "It's okay to love them and be angry with them at the same time," I told her. "It's okay to miss them while also knowing that this was necessary." Over the following weeks, our new normal began to take shape. Emma threw herself into her studies with a determination that impressed her teachers. She had always been a good student, but now she seemed driven by something deeper, perhaps an understanding that education and honest work were the only reliable paths to security. I used some of my protected savings to hire tutors for her SAT preparation and to visit colleges. Not the expensive private schools her parents had once discussed, but solid state universities where she could get an excellent education without the burden of crushing debt. "I want to study social work," she told me one evening as we reviewed college brochures. "I want to help people like the ones Mom and Dad hurt. Maybe work with elderly advocacy groups." The irony was beautiful. Rebecca and Mark's crimes had inspired their daughter to dedicate her life to protecting the very people they had victimized. As Emma's 18th birthday approached, I made a decision that would have shocked the old Martha, the woman who had given away over $200,000 to ungrateful family members. I decided to throw her a party. But this wouldn't be the elaborate, expensive celebrations I had funded for Rebecca over the years. This would be a modest gathering in my backyard with Emma's friends from school and the new family we had created among the elderly support group members. Helen Morrison brought homemade cookies. Frank Rodriguez taught Emma's friends how to play dominoes. Sandra Mitchell and James Patterson attended, along with several other people who had become part of our extended chosen family. As I watched Emma laugh with these people who had come to love her not for what she could give them, but for who she was, I realized something profound. For the first time in decades, I was surrounded by genuine family relationships. "Grandma," Emma said later that evening as we cleaned up after the party, "I have something to tell you." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I've been visiting Mom and Dad in prison." I paused in my dishwashing, not sure how I felt about this revelation. "They're different now," she continued. "Smaller somehow. Dad cries a lot. Mom keeps asking if you'll ever forgive her." "And what do you tell her?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I tell her that forgiveness isn't something you can ask for. It's something you earn by changing who you are and making amends for what you've done." The wisdom in her words amazed me. This young woman had learned lessons about accountability and redemption that many adults never master. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "I think someday I might forgive them for what they did to me, but I don't know if I'll ever forgive them for what they did to those 8 elderly victims. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness." "But you don't hate them anymore?" "No," I realized with surprise. "I don't hate them. I pity them. They threw away everything that mattered for money they didn't even get to keep. They destroyed their family, their reputation, their freedom, all for nothing." A year later, Emma graduated as valedictorian of her high school class. Her speech was about the difference between inherited privilege and earned achievement, about learning that character couldn't be bought or sold. As I watched her walk across that stage to accept her diploma, I thought about the $127,000 sitting in my protected savings account. Money that Rebecca and Mark had viewed as their inheritance. Money they had been willing to let me die to obtain. That money would now fund Emma's college education, not as a handout, but as an investment in someone who had learned the value of integrity over wealth, of compassion over greed. The education fund I had established would cover her tuition and reasonable living expenses, but Emma would work part-time to cover her personal expenses. She would graduate debt-free, but not responsibility-free. As we drove home from graduation, Emma asked me a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Grandma, do you ever regret what you did? Turning them in, I mean?" I thought about the 8 elderly victims who had recovered their dignity, if not all their money. I thought about the future victims who had been spared. I thought about Emma herself, who had learned that love sometimes requires holding people accountable for their actions. No, I said firmly. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my own daughter chose greed over love. But I don't regret stopping them from hurting more people. Good, Emma said simply. Because I'm proud of you. You're the strongest person I know. As we pulled into my driveway, our driveway now, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. A year and a half ago, I had been a naive woman lying in a hospital bed, discovering that her own daughter wanted her to die. Today, I was a woman who had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior. My house was now truly mine, protected by legal documents that ensured no one could manipulate me out of my security. My savings were intact, my future was secure, and my granddaughter was on a path to building her own honest, independent life. Most importantly, I had learned that family isn't defined by blood or genetics. It's defined by love, respect, and mutual support. The people who gathered in my backyard for Emma's birthday party were more family to me than Rebecca had been in years. Rebecca and Mark still had 6 and 5 years respectively left on their sentences. Maybe prison would teach them the lessons that freedom never could. Maybe they would emerge as different people, capable of rebuilding relationships based on love rather than exploitation. Or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, Emma and I would continue building our life together, surrounded by people who valued us for who we were rather than what we could provide. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, still something I did occasionally, even though she was 18, she asked me one final question. What would you tell other people in your situation? Other grandparents or elderly people whose families are trying to take advantage of them? I thought carefully before answering. I would tell them that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enablement. I would tell them that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish. It's necessary. And I would tell them that it's never too late to take control of your own life and your own future. Even if it means losing family? Especially if it means losing family members who only see you as a source of income. Because when you stop enabling that behavior, you create space for real relationships with people who love you for who you are. As I turned off her light and headed to my own room, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time in my adult life, I was living on my own terms, surrounded by genuine love and respect. Rebecca had asked a doctor to let me die so she could inherit my money. Instead, her greed had killed her relationship with me while teaching her daughter the most valuable lesson of all, that integrity and character are worth more than any inheritance. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the cycle of manipulation and exploitation had been broken. Emma would build her life on a foundation of honesty and hard work, and someday she would teach the same values to her own children. The predators had been defeated, the vulnerable had been protected, and a new generation was learning that love means wanting the best for someone, not wanting the most from them. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Thank you for following Martha's incredible journey of betrayal, strength, and ultimate justice. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of resilience and courage. Don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love hearing from viewers around the world. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and protect what's rightfully yours.